In 1954, Mabel Jensen in Cedar Rapids brought home her grocery envelope with $12.60 left in it after rent. She bought bones on Monday. She saved drippings on Tuesday. She dried bread on Wednesday. She turned one bruised apple into supper on Thursday. She kept milk sweet as long as she could. She kept onions from spoiling in the dark. She kept gravy from breaking when company was already seated. Nothing went out easy. Nothing got wasted twice. If a pan scorched, she had a way. If lettuce wilted, she had a way. If the icebox ran warm, she had a way. I am going to show you 30 of those ways before they are gone. This sort of kitchen sense came from plain need. A man might bring home $60 or $70 for a long week if work held steady. Plenty of houses had a small refrigerator or an old icebox, or both at different times, and neither gave you much room for foolishness. A week's groceries for 5 people had to cover every meal and every scrap. Number 7 looks like something your grandmother should have thrown away, but it was the quiet fix for a pot of soup that had turned too salty. Number 22 starts with a damp cloth and ends with a cake nobody would guess had gone dry the day before. Number 3 was not stored in the pantry, not hung in the cellar, and not set in the window, yet it kept one of the most perishable things in the kitchen from giving up early. If you care about the old household knowledge that kept families fed, see that this work keeps moving. Subscribe, stay with me, and pass it along to one person younger than you. These tricks were bought with wages, worry, and practice. They ought not to be lost now. If you want the recipes and stories that sit behind habits like these, my book, The Lost American Kitchen, is linked below. It was made to keep this kind of cooking memory in one place. Now we start at the back of the shelf. Number 30 begins right here. Number 30, oven-finished buttered burgers. If you had a crowd and one skillet, you browned the patties hard on both sides, dabbed each with a little butter, then set them on a pan in a hot oven to finish. That kept the stove free and the meat cooking evenly without constant turning. The butter helped the tops from drying while the middles caught up. At the Weller house in Dayton, 4 boys came in hungry from Saturday baseball, and supper had to land all at once, not one patty at a time. Number 29, bread with brown sugar. When brown sugar turned stiff as a brick, you put it in a covered tin or crock with a heel of bread overnight. By morning, the sugar had pulled moisture from the bread and loosened enough to scoop and pack again. You did not need much, just a plain slice, replaced when it dried out. Mrs. Baines on Willow Street kept hers in a coffee tin above the icebox because store sugar came home fresh once and had to last the month. Number 28, chilled bowl for whipped cream. Before whipping cream by hand or with a beater, you set the bowl and beaters in the coldest place you had for a good spell, then poured in the cream straight from the icebox. Cold cream held tiny air bubbles better, so it thickened faster and stayed smooth instead of going flat or grainy. For the Nolan family's Sunday pie, Ethel would cool the bowl on the porch in March because the kitchen range had already warmed the whole room. Number 27, cold water for limp celery. If celery had gone bendy in the icebox, you trimmed the ends and stood the stalks upright in a deep pitcher of cold water for an hour or 2. The stalks drew water back through the cut ends and turned crisper because the fibers filled out again. It was a saving trick, not magic, and it worked best before the celery went spotted. Myra Kepke did it before church suppers in Toledo, especially when Friday's market bundle had to last till Sunday. Number 26, save bacon fat for the pan. After breakfast, you poured the clear bacon drippings through a strainer into a jar and kept it handy for frying potatoes, greasing pans, or starting onions. That little spoonful carried flavor and stopped you from opening fresh butter or lard every time. It also made lean suppers feel less skimpy. In the Ferris apartment over the hardware store, nothing from a pound of bacon was thrown out but the paper. The exact quantities for this one are in the Lost American Kitchen collection linked below. Number 25, apple slice for cake tin. To keep a plain cake from drying, you set a fresh apple slice or two in the tin, not touching the cut face if you could help it, then closed it tight. The apple gave off enough moisture to soften the air inside the tin, and the cake stayed tender longer without tasting of much. You changed the apple before it turned tired. Mrs. Dombrowski used that trick with her Sunday spice cake because company might come by Monday, and she liked to have something ready. Number 24, potato slices for salty soup. If the soup got away from you, you peeled a raw potato, sliced it thick, and let the pieces simmer in the pot for 10 minutes, then lifted them out and tasted again before adding anything else. The potato did not perform miracles, but it drew in some salty broth and gave you a little room to recover the pot. I did that in 1958, standing at this enamel sink with steam on my glasses. The blue spoon rest was chipped clean through to the white. Number 23, vinegar for a scorched pan. When something stuck hard to the bottom, you poured in a shallow layer of water with a good splash of plain vinegar and set the pan back over low heat until it barely bubbled. Then you took a wooden spoon and worked at the dark patch while it loosened. The steam and acid softened the cooked-on crust without much scraping. My sister-in-law June used this after oatmeal in winter because that pan had to be clean again before the school lunch sandwiches. Number 22, celery back in water. When celery went limp in the icebox, you trimmed the base, stood the stalks upright in a jar or deep bowl with cold water, and left them for an hour or two. If the house was cool, you could set the whole thing by a window. The stalks pulled water up through their ribs and turned snappy again for relish trays or stuffing. Mrs. Petrowski did this every Thanksgiving morning because her grocer's celery often rode home half a day in the car. Number 21, strained bacon drippings. After breakfast, you poured the warm drippings through a small strainer or a piece of clean cloth into a jar, left the browned bits behind, and capped it when it cooled. Then you kept it in the icebox and used a spoonful at a time for the skillet, biscuit pans, or fried potatoes. Straining mattered because those little meat specks spoiled first and turned the jar sharp. At the Haskins place, nothing from 6 slices of bacon was thrown out except the paper wrapper. Number 20, onions away from potatoes. You did not heap onions and potatoes together in one bin if you wanted either one to last. Potatoes gave off moisture, and onions carried a sharp gas of their own, so the two together pushed each other towards sprouting and soft spots. You kept onions in a dry basket with air around them, and potatoes in a darker, cooler place by themselves. Old Mr. Klein stored his under the cellar stairs because one ruined sack could cost a family a week of suppers. Number 19, milk toast. When bread had gone dry but not moldy, you toasted it, set it in a shallow bowl, and poured over hot milk with a little butter and salt, sometimes a shake of pepper if supper was thin. The toast softened enough to eat with a spoon, and the hot milk turned old bread into something filling instead of waste. During February colds, Mrs. Reardon made this for her husband on the late shift because chewing crusts hurt his bad tooth. Number 18, wax paper pan lining. If you were short on grease or saving it for the skillet, you cut wax paper to fit the bottom of a cake pan, pressed it in, and rubbed just a whisper of fat on the sides. Batter released clean, and you did not lose the best part of the cake to the pan. The paper made a barrier, so sugar and milk solids did not stick so hard while baking. The exact quantities for this one are in the collection linked below. Vera Hodge did this every Friday when lard had to last. Number 17, string for slicing cake layers. When a cake had to be split for filling, you marked the middle lightly with a knife, wrapped clean white string around the cake on that line, crossed the ends, and pulled. The string cut straight through without pressing the cake down flat the way a knife could. It worked because the thin line sliced evenly all at once instead of sawing crumbs loose. For Helen Price's anniversary cake in Columbus, one layer had to become two, and there was no money to spoil it. Number 16, ice cube on scorched rice. If rice caught a little on the bottom, you did not stir the pot and spread that taste everywhere. You set the pot off the heat, laid a slice of bread or a clean dish towel under the lid, and sometimes dropped an ice cube on top of that cloth for a minute. The steam and cold helped pull some burnt smell upward instead of deeper into the rice. In the Kearney apartment over the drugstore, supper still had to reach the table by 6. Number 15, damp towel for wilted lettuce. When lettuce went limp, you did not throw it out first thing. You trimmed the stem in, shook the leaves apart, wrapped them in a damp towel, and set them in the icebox or the coolest corner for a while. The leaves took back some moisture and crisped enough for sandwiches or supper salad. It worked because the dry air had pulled water from the greens, and the damp cloth gave a little back slowly. Mrs. Pelham did this on Tuesdays before bridge. Number 14, save the bacon paper. After the butcher wrapped sliced bacon in that waxed paper, plenty of kitchens folded the clean pieces and kept them in the icebox. You used one to grease a skillet, line a pan for biscuits, or cover leftovers that would dry out. There was still a little fat on it, and the paper itself kept food from sticking or losing moisture too fast. At the Donnelly house, 3 daughters shared one lunch pail shelf, and every scrap of useful wrapping got kept. Number 13, hot water for stuck jelly. When jelly or jam clung stubborn in the glass, you poured in a little hot water, capped it, and shook it hard. Then you used that sweet water in oatmeal, over bread pudding, or stirred into pan gravy for ham. It worked because the heat loosened the sugar on the sides and bottom, and nothing worth paying for got left behind. Mrs. Rooker and Lima kept a row of nearly empty jars by the sink and said each held one more breakfast. Number 12, bacon grease jar. After breakfast, you poured the warm drippings through a fine strainer or a bit of clean cloth into a jar and kept it covered by the stove, or in the icebox if the kitchen ran hot. A spoonful started pan gravy, fried potatoes, or kept cornbread from sticking. It worked because rendered fat held flavor and heat better than a bare dry pan, and nothing went to waste. Mrs. Peebles in Chillicothe called it her seasoning jar, and she meant it. Number 11, flour sack towels. You washed every flour sack and kept the best ones for kitchen work. A damp one wrapped around lettuce or celery in the icebox kept it from drying out, while a dry one covered rising dough or polished glasses without lint. Tight cotton held moisture where you wanted it and breathed better than wax paper. In my kitchen in 1956, the towel rack by the porcelain sink held 3 of them. Still rough at the hems, I can feel that red-stitched corner in my hand. Number 10, potato water for gravy. When potatoes were done, You dipped off a cup or two of that cloudy cooking water before draining the pot. Then if gravy looked too thick or short, you whisked in the hot potato water a little at a time instead of plain water. It worked because the starch already in the water gave the gravy body and helped it stay together, not thin and flat. At the Haskins farmhouse, Sunday roast fed 9, and no one wasted what had already come up to a boil. Number 9, the breadcrumb jar. When bread went too dry for sandwiches, you tore it up, dried it near a low oven or on top of the icebox, then crushed it with a rolling pin and kept the crumbs in a tin. They stretched meatloaf, topped scallop dishes, and gave fried cutlets a decent coat. Dry crumbs worked because they soaked up drippings and held shape instead of turning pasty. The exact quantities for this one are in the Lost American Kitchen collection linked below. Vera Mott saved rye and white separately in labeled coffee cans. Number 8, tomatoes on the counter, not in the icebox. If tomatoes came in green-shouldered or barely ripe, you set them stem side down in a cool room, out of the sun, and checked them each day. Once ripe, you used the softest first. Cold dulled the flavor and turned the flesh mealy, while room air let them finish evenly without sweating. In the Parker house, garden tomatoes sat on the enamel pie safe in August because the icebox was for milk, meat, and what could truly spoil. Number 7, cold water for wilted greens. If lettuce, celery, or radishes went limp, you trimmed the ends, dropped them into a deep bowl of cold water, and left them a good half hour, longer if the kitchen was hot. Sometimes a few ice chips helped, if you had them to spare. It worked because the vegetables drew water back into their cells and stiffened up again. At the Donnelly apartment over the drugstore, payday was Friday, and Wednesday's salad had to look fresh enough to carry the table. Number 6, salt scrub for cast iron. When the skillet still held a little heat, you tipped in a spoonful or two of coarse salt and rubbed with a folded paper sack, a rag, or the flat of a cut potato. Then you wiped it clean and set it back over low heat with the thinnest film of grease. The salt scoured off stuck bits without soaking the pan, and water was what brought rust. Ida Mercer did this after frying ham before church suppers in Lima. Number 5, a jar for rolling pie crust. If you had no rolling pin free, you floured a smooth glass jar, filled it with cold water, and rolled the dough from the center outward, turning the crust a little at a time. If the glass began to stick, you dusted it again and kept moving. The weight of the water pressed evenly, and the cold kept the shortening from going soft too soon. Marie Donnelly used a pickle jar every Thursday because her wooden pin had lost its handle. Number 4, shake cream into butter. You poured heavy cream into a clean jar, no more than halfway, screwed the lid on tight, and shook until the cream first thickened, then broke into yellow clumps and thin buttermilk. You strained off the liquid, rinsed the butter in cold water, and worked out the last drops with a spoon. In 1958, I stood at the sink with a green Band-Aid on my thumb and shook a mayonnaise jar till my arms burned. The butter thumped all at once against the glass. Number 3, cold water for limp greens. When lettuce, celery, or radishes went tired and bendy, you trimmed the ends, sank them in a deep bowl of cold water, and left them alone a while before drying them well. If you had a little ice, so much the better, but plain cold water still helped. The vegetables pulled moisture back into their cells, so they stood up instead of lying there like dish rags. Pearl Haskins did this before Card Club, when market lettuce had ridden home half the day. Number 2, lift, do not stir, a scorched pot. The instant soup, oatmeal, or milk smelled singed. You stopped stirring and spooned the good part from the top into a clean pan, leaving the bottom crust right where it stuck. Then you warmed it gently and corrected the thickness with a splash of hot water or milk. Burnt taste lives in that dark layer first, and stirring drags it through the whole supper. At the Kiefer house, Agnes saved many a chowder this way on rainy wash days. Number 1, keep a bacon grease cup. After breakfast, you poured the drippings through a little strainer or clean cloth into a crock or cup, covered it, and kept it by for frying potatoes, greasing pans, or starting onions and cabbage. 1 spoonful could season a whole skillet when meat was scarce. It worked because the fat already carried salt and brown flavor, so plain food tasted like more than it cost. Mrs. Larkin in Springfield said that cup stood between her family and many a thin supper. If you do one of these tonight, make it the browned flour gravy starter. Takes a few quiet minutes, saves bacon drippings, and turns plain potatoes or a skillet of leftovers into supper that looks like you meant it. That trick stretched meat farther than any fancy casserole ever did for us. In 1959, in this same kitchen, I kept a blue enamel coffee can by the stove for saved fat. The lid rattled when you set it down. On damp days, the window over the sink sweated, and I could still make biscuits by feel before daylight. Tell me which one your mother or grandmother actually did, not read about later, did with her own hands, kept a grease tin, grated stale bread, cooled cakes on chair backs, hid apples in the cellar, whatever it was. Whichever one shows up most in the comments is the one I cover next. Next time I am talking about foods that sat on ordinary American tables in 1971 and 1978 and would not be allowed now the same way. Things with dyes, oils, and packages that looked cheerful enough, sold for 69 cents maybe, and nobody at supper thought twice. Subscribe if you want the old ways explained plain, with prices, brands, and no fairy dust. I tell it the way it happened, what things cost, what broke, what burned, and what still fed 6 people when payday was 3 days off for sure. This channel keeps the scrape, stretch, and make do memory alive.